continuing our reading in Matthew, and we are starting in chapter 5 today. And the setting, we remember that Jesus is now about 30 years old, and in the last couple chapters, Matthew has described for us how he has been prepared. God has prepared him. Jesus has allowed himself to be prepared for his earthly ministry, a time that's going to be about 3 years long. And so we start out in Matthew chapter 5, and we read these words. It says, "One day, as he saw the crowds gathering, Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples gathered all around him, and he began to teach them." Now understand that Jesus had been performing miracles already. He had made blind people see and lame people walk, and he cleansed people who had leprosy and other skin diseases. And so now they were very interested to see something is different about this man, and they're interested to see what he is teaching. And so this teaching that we're going to be looking at for the next 2.5 weeks is often called the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5 through 7. Matthew records for us, he's already told us that Jesus, when Jesus began teaching, he began teaching about what he called the kingdom of God. And the kingdom of God is the place where people can live in God's kingdom in such a way where they live under the direct rule and the direct guidance of God in their life. And Jesus taught that the kingdom begins now and it goes into eternity. But the people wondered, they knew about earthly kingdoms, and they wondered if this was going to be like Caesar's kingdom, the Roman kingdom. Or they wondered whether it was going to be like the kingdom that was described to them by the Jewish religious leaders of that particular day. Now, as Jesus is sitting down to teach, and that was the posture that teachers used, they sat down rather than stood up. It seemed that there were several groups of people who were gathered there. There were those that were very satisfied with Rome. They liked the peace and stability that Rome brought. They didn't mind that they were being controlled by Rome and ruled by Rome. And then there were also those that were actually on the 180-degree flip side of that. There were the revolutionaries. They were often called the zealots, who were sick and tired of being ruled by other people. They wanted Israel to be top dog. They wanted them to be on top. And then there was a group of men who were known as the religious elite. We often called them the Pharisees. And they were, I might say, the self-declared religious elite. And they wanted to please God, but they wanted to do it on their own terms. And so they had invented laws and raised the bar of expectation so high for pleasing God that the common person just kind of gave up and said, what's the use if we have to live up to their standards? So Jesus tells us that they liked people to notice them, notice how good they were, notice how they prayed. So they would often do it out in the open so other people would be impressed. And they also wanted people to see how they gave their offerings, to make sure that everybody was watching. These Pharisees, they controlled the synagogue and they controlled the religious life of the day. Now the last group of people that were gathered that day were by far the biggest group, maybe 80 to 90% of the people. Who were the regular Josephs and Marys, you might call them. And they were doing their best to please God, but their reaction to the religious elite group was, I could never be as religiously good as those guys say you need to be, as they've defined goodness. And so even if I tried, what's the use? So the next verse are Jesus' first words. And let's read those for you. It says Matthew 5:3. It says, "God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him, for the kingdom of God is theirs." Understand that these would have been radical words. Jesus tells them, and he tells us that Jesus' kingdom, God's kingdom, is wide open to anyone who trusts. God actually does care. God cares about us. God cared about them. God cares about each person. It's hard to imagine how different, what a different message this was than that with which that they had received from others. How inviting Jesus' words actually are. So you might say what was going on in their minds was, so Jesus, let me get this straight. You say we will be blessed when we acknowledge our total and complete dependence on you, that we can't do it on our own, and that we can't do anything that ultimately matters in life without you. And Jesus would say, that's it. You've got it. That's what it means to follow me. That's what it means to follow my teaching. We are broken, and we realize we don't have the answers for life's biggest questions, and he does, and so he calls us to trust him. And on the flip side, if we continue with our primary goal being the living for ourselves, living for just our own comfort and our own bank accounts, you might say, then we're going to miss out on God's plan for our lives. So, in these next few verses, I am very excited about reading them together. All these verses begin with the word blessed or blessed. God, we often call them the Beatitudes, which is actually the Latin word for blessed. And Jesus is telling us what it's like to live in the kingdom of God and the blessing that it is to realize that we are completely and totally dependent on him for everything. There's so much more good stuff to come. Let's read them together, and let's understand the radical nature of what Jesus is calling us to understand, that we need him. We need him in every way. Have an amazing day.
If these devotional videos are helpful to you, subscribe to our channel and click the notification button so you know when we post a new video. And of course, please share them with others.